6.6 million years ago, our prehistoric ancestors were barely surviving. But after studying ancient fossils, scientists have finally unlocked the secrets of how they survived. So what was life really like 6.6 million years ago? And were these early humans actually smarter than we think? Stay tuned. 6.6 million years ago, the world looked very different. The Earth's climate was much warmer and there were no ice caps. Most of the world was covered in lush tropical rainforest, and new species were constantly evolving and adapting. For our human ancestors who lived in Africa during this time, the world was a dangerous place. Living in such a harsh environment, they had to learn to adapt quickly in order to survive. One of the biggest threats that our ancestors faced was the lack of food. The savannas and woodlands of Africa are known for their abundance of large mammals, but at the time, there were very few large mammals. Instead, the forests were filled with small mammals and birds which were difficult to hunt. As a result, our ancestors had to become skilled hunters, learning to track and kill small prey. They also had to learn to eat insects and other invertebrates in order to get enough protein. Another danger that our ancestors faced was the predators. At the time, Africa was home to some of the largest and most dangerous carnivores that have ever lived. Huge packs of wild dogs, big cats, and hyenas all roamed the land, hunting anything that got in their way. To escape these predators, our ancestors had to learn to climb trees and hide in the undergrowth. They also had to develop the ability to run long distances at high speeds. In addition to these dangers, our ancestors also had to deal with the elements. The weather in Africa can be unpredictable, to say the least. There are frequent droughts and floods, and the temperature can vary widely from day to night. Our ancestors had to learn how to find shelter and stay dry in the rain and the heat. They also had to develop the ability to go without food and water for extended periods of time. So, given all of these dangers, it's hard to believe that any human could survive for more than a few days. But our ancestors not only survived, they threw. In fact, they went on to have children and raise families. And eventually they even learned to domesticate animals and grow crops. So what was it about these early humans that allowed them to survive and even thrive in such a hostile environment? Well, first of all, our ancestors were highly adaptable. They were able to change their diet and their behavior based on the available resources, and they were able to live in a variety of environments. Secondly, our ancestors were highly intelligent. They were able to develop complex hunting strategies, and they were able to use tools. Finally, our ancestors were highly social. They lived in groups and they shared resources and responsibilities. This allowed them to take on larger prey, and it allowed them to protect each other from predators. So our ancestors were able to survive in Africa 6.6 million years ago thanks to a combination of factors. They were highly adaptable, highly intelligent, and highly social. Now let's move on to the next question. Were tools invented 6.6 million years ago? The answer may surprise you. The idea that early humans invented tools 6.6 million years ago is a relatively new one. For many years, scientists believed that the first tools weren't invented until about 2.6 million years ago. However, new evidence has come to light that suggests that our ancestors may have been using tools much earlier than we thought. One of the pieces of evidence that points to the use of early tools comes from animal bones. Found at an archaeological site in Kenya, the bones date back about 6.6 million years and they show signs of buttering. Buttering is the process of scraping meat off of bones using a sharp object. The sharp object could have been a stone or a piece of flint, but it could have also been a wooden dowel or a bone. If our ancestors were using sharp objects to scrape meat off of bones, then they would have been able to access the nutritious bone marrow. This would have been an important source of nutrition in an environment where food was scarce. Another piece of evidence that points to the use of early tools comes from cut marks on animal bones. Cut marks are made by sharp objects, and they're often seen on butchered meat. Again, the sharp object could have been a stone or a piece of flint, but it could have also been a wooden tool or a bone. If our ancestors were cutting up animals for meat, then they would have been able to get at the juiciest cuts and the most nutritious parts. This would have made hunting and buttering more efficient, and it would have allowed them to get more food. So what do these tools tell us about the early humans who used them? Well, first of all, they tell us that these humans were highly adaptable. They were able to use a variety of materials for tools, and they were able to create tools for different purposes. Secondly, they tell us that these humans were highly intelligent. They were able to conceptualize and create an object that could be used as a tool. Finally, these tools tell us that these humans were highly skilled. It took a lot of practice and coordination to make and use these tools effectively. Our ancestors were able to create and use tools that allowed them to get more food, which in turn allowed them to have more babies and expand their population. This set them apart from other species, and it allowed them to eventually become the dominant species on the planet. Now let's move on to the next question. How did early humans spend their days 6.6 million years ago? The answer may surprise you. Most people imagine that early humans spent their days 6.6 million years ago hunting and gathering. And while this is true in some sense, there is more to the story. The fact is, our ancestors didn't just spend their days looking for food. They also spent time doing other activities that were essential to their survival. For example, they spent time drinking water, finding shelter, and avoiding predators. Let's take a closer look at each of these activities. First, let's talk about drinking water. Staying hydrated is crucial for survival, and our ancestors had to spend a lot of time looking for water. In some cases, they had to walk for miles each day to reach a water hole. Once they got there, they had to spend time drinking, and then they had to spend time waiting for the water to be replenished. Next, let's talk about finding shelter. Our ancestors didn't just spend time looking for food. They also spent time looking for shelter. In order to survive the night, they had to find a place that was safe from predators and the elements. In some cases, they could find shelter in caves or under large rocks. But in other cases, they had to build a shelter out of sticks and leaves. Building a shelter took a lot of time and effort, but it was worth it in the end. Finally, let's talk about avoiding predators. Our ancestors didn't just spend time looking for food and shelter. They also spent time trying to avoid predators. In some cases, they could avoid predators by staying in groups. In other cases, they could avoid predators by climbing trees or hiding in the undergrowth. But no matter what they did, they had to spend some time each day on the lookout for predators. So, you can see that early humans didn't just spend their days hunting and gathering. They also spent time doing other activities that were essential to their survival. They had to drink water, find shelter, and avoid predators. And they had to spend time each day doing these things. In fact, they had to spend more time doing these things than they did hunting and gathering. This means that early humans had to be highly organized in order to survive. They had to be able to plan ahead and anticipate their needs. They also had to be able to work together and share resources. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to survive in such a hostile environment. As we've seen, our ancestors were highly adaptable, highly intelligent, and highly social. They were able to adapt to a changing environment. They were able to use tools, and they were able to work together in groups. These are all traits that allowed them to survive and thrive 6.6 million years ago. So, what can we learn from them today? Well, I think that we can learn the importance of adaptability, intelligence, and social skills. We live in a world that is constantly changing, and we need to be able to adapt in order to survive. We also need to be highly intelligent and social in order to solve the problems we face. So let us follow in the footsteps of our ancestors, and let us work together to create a better future.